Good morning. This is Dawn Slike representing Christian Neck Scarves. It is Thursday, August 8th, 2024. And I thought this would be a good morning to do a tutorial showing how to make a God and Country scarf. The God and Country scarf is red, white, and blue, the same colors as the American flag, and I have come up with a new pattern for that, and as of today I'm starting with a new yarn, which gives me more ammunition to make these. I'm really excited because I have found out that the Joann brand Big Twist Value yarn is offered in red, white, and blue that is very, very close to the colors of the American flag. I'm super happy about that because I like the affordability of the Big Twist Value, and I also love its softness. So this morning I'm going to make my tutorial using Big Twist Value yarn in red, white, and blue with white as the dominant color. So I'm going to begin by showing you how I start my Christian neck scarves. This one will have 30 stitches on a size 10.5 knitting needle, American size. I'm just casting on right now, and this will be done at the beginning with a double rib pattern for the first 6 rows. So I'm just counting my cast-ons right now. I have 5, 10, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. So I have 30 stitches cast on, and I'm going to do 6 rows of double ribbing, starting with 2 knit, then purling 2, then knitting 2, etc., till I get to the end, which ends with 2 knit. That'll be the odd number rows, and then the even number rows, which is the back, will start with 2 purl and end with 2 purl. So that'll be 2 purl, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, etc. That's the back side. So the odd number rows will be beginning with 2 knit and ending with 2 knit, and the even number rows will be beginning with purl 2 and ending with purl 2. And we'll do that for 6 rows. So I'm going to get started. I don't do my Christian neck scarves with fringe anymore unless I really want to put fringe on it for some reason. I have decided this year I would rather finish and end my begin and end my scarves with double ribbing. I think it looks neat. It's very pretty, and I'm not very good at fringe. I admit that. My partners make very pretty fringe. I don't. So I've just decided to go this new route with a double ribbing pattern at both ends. Knit, knit, purl, purl. Taking my time. I don't want to stretch things too much and ruin it. Knit, knit. Purl, purl. Knit, knit. Purl, purl. Knit, knit. Purl, purl. knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit. The first row is always a little bit more cautious. You want to start off well. You don't want to be stretching things, and want to keep my tension fairly even. Purl, purl, knit, knit. And we're coming up on the end, and we're going to be doing something. Maybe if you're a professional knitter, you already do this, but I had to learn this from one of my knitting partners. Chrissy showed Diane and me how to do this. Now, this is supposed to be ending in knit, knit. However, Chrissy does this beautiful edging along the sides of the scarf, which gives it a beautiful finish. Edge doesn't just end with knit, knit, or purl, purl. The last stitch on each side is going to have a loopy edge that finishes the edge this direction. And what she does is she brings the yarn forward and then just slips the stitch onto the needle with the yarn forward. And then when she flips over the needle, so you're doing the back side, the even number row, you're going to knit the stitch with the yarn already in position in the back. And what that does is creates a loop on the edge, which will be looping all the way up the side. And you do one side at a time, but you end the row the same way, where you're putting the yarn towards you before the last stitch and then slipping that last stitch onto the right needle, so that you can begin with that stitch the next row with the yarn in the different position, and it continues the loop pattern on both edges. So I just finished that, and now I'm going to purl what was knit stitches on the front or purl stitches on the back. So I'm purling the second stitch like I normally would, and then finishing the double ribbing. The next two stitches are knit on the back, purl on the front. So we're going to knit the knits and purl the purls. Knit, knit, purl, purl, 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 knit, knit, we're at the end. Purl one, leave the yarn on this side, and then just slip the needle through the top of the last stitch, slip it off, slide it off the left needle, and that finishes row 2. And then we begin row 3. Make sure you grab the right strand of yarn. I'll be snipping that off pretty soon. Slide in from the top, bring the yarn from behind and make your knit stitch, and then you create a second loop. It's really quite pretty when you get going. And then we knit the second stitch. We're on the front again, so this is the odd number row. purl, purl, etc., etc., etc. Now, as long as you remember you're doing a loop on the ends, you won't have a problem. And you only have to loop on the 30th stitch, which turns into the first stitch as you're flipping it over. So this loop happens and then that loop happens, and then this loop happens and then that loop happens. They both don't happen on the same row. You're doing one end at a time. So my plan here now is to knit rows 3 through 6 in double ribbing. So I'm going to turn off the camera and do all that before we begin the rest of the pattern. I have completed my 6 rows of double ribbing. So that ends the double ribbing. Now this edging we're putting on continues throughout the rest of the scarf. So now we're going to begin the Christian neck scarf pattern. Briefly, you're going to have this edging and then a single stitch of seed, and then you're going to have 6 stitches of braided cable, and then you're going to have 3 stitches of seed, then you're going to have 8 stitches of the column where the crosses are going to go, right in the middle, and then you're going to have 3 more stitches of seed, and then you're going to have 6 more stitches of the second braided cable, and then you're going to have a single stitch of seed and the loop on the end. So that's what we're doing, and I'm going to walk you through it kind of slowly. Some of you have never seen this pattern before, and hopefully you'll be able to understand what I'm saying as I'm going along. So we were going to make the first one a loop like we did in the previous rows. And then the second stitch is a purl stitch on both the even number rows and the odd number rows, because it's always going to be a seed stitch. So we're going to purl the second stitch, and we're also going to purl the 29th stitch, next to the last stitch. The 29th stitch and the second stitch are both going to be purl stitches on both the odd number and the even number rows. That's a seed stitch that always happens. Okay, after the second stitch, we're going into 6 stitches of knit to establish the column for the braided cables. So the very first row is going to be 6 knit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're doing 3 seed, which is always purl, knit, purl, both on the front and the back. Both the odd number and the even number rows have 3 seed, which is always purl, knit, purl. Then we have 8 stitches of the column where the crosses are going to be. These 8 stitches are going to be on the odd number rows for the beginning of it. 8 knit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we have another 3 seed stitches again, which is purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl. Then we're going to have the 6 stitches establishing the column for the braided cables, so those are 6 knit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we have the last seed stitch, which is always purl, and then the very last stitch is the one we slip, point into from the top, sliding it onto the right hand needle with the yarn facing you. Okay, that was the very first row of the Christian neck scarf pattern. So we turn the needle around. Now we're on row 2. We're on the back side. We're going to make our loop on the end, coming in from the top. I'm sorry if I'm repetitious and annoying you with my repetition. I'm just not sure everybody knows how to make these loopy ends. So you're going in from the top, using the yarn from behind because we left it in the back. Okay, then you change needles. Now, the next stitch is a seed stitch, which is always purl, both front and back. The seed stitch. And then, I'm sorry, I moved the yarn and I shouldn't have. The next 6 stitches are the back side of the column on the front where we're establishing braided cables, the next 6 stitches. So on the front they were knit, on the back they will be purl. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the next 3 stitches are seed, which again are on both sides, purl, knit, purl. Then we have the middle column, which is 8 stitches, where we're going to be putting our crosses. So they were knit on the front, so they're purl on the back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 3 more seed stitches on the other side of that column. Purl, knit, purl, and then we have the second braided cable column, which was knit on the front, so we're purling on the back. Purl 1, purl 2, purl 3, purl 4, purl 5, purl 6. And then the seed stitch, the 29th stitch, is purl, and then the slip, we're going to slip that last stitch with the yarn towards us. And there we are. Row 2 is finished. Now we're going to look at the front again. We're about to start row 3. I want to look at what we're doing, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. My seeds are correct, my columns are correct, and I'm about to start making braided cables. You can't start making braided cables on row 1. You have to establish the knitted stitches to get it going, and then you start braiding. You can start braiding as early as row 3, which we're doing. I like how it looks so far. It's nice and even, the tension is even, the color's beautiful, the stitches are pretty, the loops on the sides are beautiful and uniform. I love how this looks. I'm so glad Chrissy taught this to us. It just gives a pretty finished edge. And we'll continue all of that through the whole pattern. Okay, so now we're going to start row 3, and this is where we begin making our braided cables. Some of you may not know how to make braided cables, so I'm going to walk through that pretty slow. Okay, we're going to make our loop. And then we're purling the next stitch because that's a purl, always purl, both sides, 1 seed stitch. Now, we're going to start for part 1 of braided cables. There's 2 parts to this. So we're taking our cabling needle and we're taking the short part of the cabling needle, there's a point at both ends. You're slipping that through the top of the first 2 stitches of your 6 stitches of knit. First 2 stitches, drop them onto this cable, drop it in front so it's hanging, it's not going anywhere, it's not going to fall off. Then you knit the next 2 stitches, which is stitches 3 and 4 of those cables. Then you bring this needle up again so that the long end is your new needle. And you're going to knit stitches 1 and 2, which are in the 3 and 4 spot now because you're wrapping your cable. And you just made your first part of your braided cable. And then there's stitches 5 and 6, which are just simply knitting at this point. 1 and 2. Okay, now the next 3 stitches are seed, purl, knit, purl. Then the next 8 stitches are the column where we're going to put our crosses. 1, 2, we're knitting, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we have 3 more seed stitches, purl, knit, purl. And then we have the second braided cable column. So again, we take our cabling needle out. I like to tuck mine in at my collar on a t-shirt or a top so that it's handy. Take the short end of your cabling needle, and you go in through the top, pick up 2 stitches, slide them onto the cable needle. I keep wanting to call it a braided cable needle. It's a cabling needle. Anyway, you're sliding it onto the needle from the short end and dropping it down in front, and then you're knitting the next 2 stitches, and then you're flipping up your cabling needle and sliding your stitches to the top of the long end of the needle and knitting those 2 stitches. And then there's 2 stitches left for your braided cable, so you just simply knit those on this row. This is part 1. And then you're purling the next stitch because that's a seed. It's always a seed. It's always purl in this pattern. And then you're slipping the last stitch onto your right needle with the yarn towards you. Okay, row 3 is finished. Everything's going well. Now we're turning over the needle to the 4th row, and we're making our loopy stitch. I guess there's a name for this loopy edge, but I don't know what it is. And then we're purling stitch number 2, because again, that's a seed stitch. It always gets purled. Just remember, stitch number 2 and stitch number 29 are always purl, no matter what side you're on. Okay. Now we're on the back side of the braided cable. The next 6 stitches will be purled because the front is knitted. Four, 5, 6. Okay, 3 seed, purl, knit, purl. 1, 2, 3. And then the back side of the cross column, so that's purl 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 3 seed again, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, and then the back side of the second braided cable, so that's purl 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then the seed stitch, purl, and then with the yarn on your side, slip it through. We just completed row 4. We're going to look at the front. Everything's still in order. Seed stitches look wonderful. We're about to do part 2 of 2 parts to making a braided cable. part 1 was accomplished on row 3. We're now going into row 5, and we're going to do the second part of 2 parts to finish the braided cable, which doesn't end there. We're going to keep cabling. So we're going to make our loop stitch. Then we're going to make our seed stitch, which is purl. Okay, now we're going to start part 2 of the braided cable. Instead of putting these first 2 stitches on a cabling needle, we're going to knit them. Now the next 2 stitches, which we cabled last time, are going to go on the cabling needle, same way, short end down from the top through the next 2 stitches, but we're not dropping it in front, we're dropping it in the back. And then we're knitting stitches 5 and 6. And then, and it's a little trickier because it's in the back now, you want to bring this needle up without catching anything with this short end. You're going to bring the cabling needle up from the back and knit the 2 stitches that are on the cabling needle. Just be careful how you do that so you're not catching something accidentally with the short end of this needle and causing a yarn problem. Okay, so we have just finished the process of making a braided cable on row 5. Okay, now we're bringing the yarn back in front because we're going to purl, knit, purl these seed stitches. Purl, knit, purl. Now, row 5 is when we start making the cross. So let's look at this for a moment. We have 8 stitches in the middle that are all knitted. We're going to put a cross in the middle of this. So instead of 8 across knit, we're going to knit 3, purl 2, and then knit 3. So that the purl 2 is the beginning of the cross and it's dead center of those 8 stitches. And this is the bottom of the cross, the beginning of the cross. There will be 8 rows like this where you're going to have purl on the front for the bottom of the cross. So you're knitting 3, purling 2, knitting 3. So we're going to do that. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, purl 2, knit 1, knit 2, and knit 3. So you've just begun the beginning of the bottom of the cross. Now we're going to bring the yarn forward again because we're going to purl, knit, purl the next 3 seed stitches. Purl, knit, purl, and then we're going to do the second braided cable. Again, we're knitting the first 2 stitches. Then the middle 2 stitches are going on the cabling needle with the short end going through the top of the next 2 stitches, dropping them down behind, knitting the next 2 stitches, bringing up the cabling needle. Be careful when you do it so you don't catch this short end of the needle on anything you're working on. Knit 2 off the cable needle, and then finish up the row by making your seed stitch, which is a purl stitch, and then slipping the last stitch onto the right needle. Now we can see the braided cable effect, but you'll see it better after you do the 6th row, after you do the back side. Then you'll be able to see that a little better. So we're making our loop stitch on the end, then we're purling the next stitch, which is the seed, then we're doing the back side of the braided cable, which is 6 purls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we have 3 seed, purl knit purl. Again, that's purl knit purl no matter which side it is. Keeps your seed stitch going. And then on the back side of the cross, which we just started, instead of purling 8 across, we're going to purl 3, knit 2, because it's opposite of what's on the front, purl 2, and then purl 3 again, and then we have the seed stitches, purl knit purl, and then we have the back side of the braided cables, which is 6 purls, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then purl your seed, your single seed, and then slip the last stitch with the yarn towards you. Now I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to look at it from the front. Isn't this beautiful? So let me explain the pattern. People wonder why we make our Christian neck scarves the way we do. It's very intense and beautiful and symbolic. First of all, we make our crosses to run down the center to keep Jesus Christ the center of our lives. There will be 10 crosses in this particular scarf. The braided cables are symbolic of the integrated continuity of the Holy Trinity. You have 3 strands making a braid. There are 3 persons in the Holy Trinity. And this symbolism is important because it continues throughout the scarf. All 3 persons of the Holy Trinity are members of the same God. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And the braided cable beautifully symbolizes their interaction and their continuity. The seed stitch is symbolic of the seed that Jesus plants within our hearts to share his good news of salvation, mercy, and forgiveness. The seed stitches are just as important as the crosses, just as important as the braided cables for the Holy Trinity. All our Christian neck scarves contain crosses, braided cables, and seed stitches. We're very, very pleased with our pattern, and this is why we're sharing it with the world on a video. This pattern is not written down. That's why I'm making the tutorials, to show you how to make these yourself. I'm going to pause now. I'm going to stop the camera, just check on the direction, make sure that this is being captured appropriately, and then we can pick this up again in a few minutes. We're going to resume knitting. I've already made the loop stitch on the end. We are now on row 7. So on row 7, the braided cable part is the same as row 3. So we're going to make our seed. After I made the loop, we're making the seed stitch, which is a purl. And we're going back to the same thing we did on row 3 for the braided cable. We have the cabling needle. We're picking up the first 2 stitches, again with the point down from the top, grabbing the first 2 stitches. We're going to repeat what we did on row 3. We're dropping the needle down in front. We're knitting stitches 3 and 4. And we're bringing the cable needle up again to knit those 2 stitches off the cable needle, and then we're going to knit stitches 5 and 6 Okay, so we've cabled again, part 1, and then we're doing the seed, purl, knit, purl, and then we are at the cross panel, so we're going to do the 3rd row of the cross, which is knit 3, purl 2, knit 3, which is exactly the same as what we did on the 1st row of the cross, which was row 5 of the pattern. I know all of that's confusing because our cables have certain row numbers and our cross has certain numbers. Just follow along with me. We're on the 3rd row of the cross, which is actually row 7. And then we're going to knit 3 after the cross. Okay, then we're going to do 3 seed stitches again, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, and then we're going to do the 2nd braided cable, which again, you're taking your cable needle, the short end, coming down from the top and grabbing the next 2 stitches, which is the first 2 stitches, just like row 3. And then you're knitting stitches 3 and 4, and then you're bringing your cable needle up and knitting off the needle stitches. They are now they're in the 3 and 4 position now. They were stitches 1 and 2 before. And then you're going to knit the last 2 stitches of the cable, which is knit stitch number 5 and 6, and then you're going to purl your seed stitch, your solo seed stitch, and then you're going to, from the top, slip the loop stitch on the end, which is the 30th stitch, with the yarn towards you. The yarn towards you is important because that's what creates the loop effect on the end of the scarf on both sides. The yarn must be towards you. When you knit the next stitch, you're working from that direction. Now we're on row 8, the back, and we're going to knit the first stitch and make the loop, purl the next stitch, which is a solitary seed again, purl the back of your braided cable, which is purl 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then we have 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl. Then we have the cross column, which on the back side, my yarns are getting tangled up. This is not funny. I was supposed to trim this and I haven't done it yet. The tail's too long. It's in the way. Okay, we're at the cross, so we're on the back side of the cross. We're going to purl 3 and then knit 2 where the cross is, which is purl on the front. Knit 2 and then purl 3 and then 3 seed, which is purl, knit, purl. Again, that's both the front and the back. The seed stitch is purl, knit, purl next to the cross. And then we have the back side of the braided cable, which is purl 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a purl, and a slip. Okay. Now we have rows 7 and 8 finished. These are numbered rows since the double ribbing was completed. So this is the main pattern. Okay, I'm going to pause this because I want to snip this off. This tail. This tail is way too long and it's getting in the way. It needs to be very short. Okay, that's much better. Not in the way anymore. You need to leave a little tail because you got to weave it in. Alright, we're going to begin row 9, which is the 5th row of the cross, and part 2 of the braided cables. So here we go. We're making our loop. This is row 9. Purling the seed stitch. This is part 2 of the braided cables, so we're knitting the first 2 stitches. Slipping the next 2 stitches onto the cable needle and dropping it behind. Knitting the last 2 stitches of the braided cable. And then bringing up the stitches on the cable needle to knit those, which completes the braided cable. And this is the second braided cable we've completed. Yay! Then we're bringing the yarn forward so we can purl knit purl the next 3 seed stitches. Then we are doing the cross column, which again is knit 3, purl 2, knit 3, purl knit purl for the 3 seed stitches, and then the second braided cable, which is knit the first 2 stitches. This is part 2 again. Slip the next 2 stitches onto the short end, point down on the braiding on the cabling needle, and then knit the next 2 stitches. You drop that needle behind, that's part 2. And then you're going to knit those 2 stitches to complete the second braided cable. And then you're purling your seed stitch and you're slipping the last stitch. Once you get rolling on this seems complicated if you've never done it before, but once you get rolling on it, you're going to figure it out. Your brain's going to start working really well, and you're going to see how all of these things work together to produce something really beautiful. I'm going to keep recording this because I want to get you through an entire cross. I want to get you through all 12 rows of this cross, and then there will be 4 more rows of stockinette in the cross column to complete the color block. And then we'll be changing color. So I'm going to row 10, the back side. Make your loop on the end. Purl the next stitch, seed. Purl the next 6 stitches back of the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 seed, purl knit purl, purl, knit, purl, 3 purl for the cross, 3 purl before the cross, 2 knit of the cross. This is the back side. The front is purled cross, the back is knitted cross. 3 more purls after the cross. That completes the cross column. Then we have 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl. Then we have the back side of your cable, 6 purls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you've probably figured out by now you only cable on the front of a cable. You don't have to worry about doing any cabling on the back side. It doesn't happen. You're just purling across. And then the seed stitch, purl, and the very last stitch, the loop, which we slip on. Remember, your needle goes from the top down, just slipping that stitch onto the right hand needle with the yarn towards you. That part's important. So we just finished 10th row. Now, as I mentioned before, there are 8 rows of the cross before we put the cross beam in. So we have 2 more rows of this to go where we're putting purls on the front for the cross. So we're going to do that, and then I'll show you how to do the cross beam. So we're on row 11. Knit the loop on the end, purl the seed, do part 1 of your braided cable, needle in front, knit the last 2 stitches of that braided cable. That was part 1. 3 seed, purl, knit, purl. Cross row, across column. 3 knit, two purl, three knit, purl, knit, purl for the 3 seed, second braided cable, part 1. First 2 stitches go on the cable needle, knit the next 2 stitches, knit the cable needle stitches, put the needle away, knit the last 2 stitches. There's only 6 stitches. This could get a lot more complicated, but I kept it simple. Okay, we're going to purl our seed stitch and slip the last stitch with the point down. Perfect. That was row 11. I just got a delivery, so I have to pause my camera. I will be back. Isn't this beautiful? Okay, now we're going to begin the 12th row, which is the 8th row of the cross, which is the bottom of the cross. So we have the loop on the end. This is the back side. Purl the seed, purl the 6 behind the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 seed, purl, knit, purl. The back goes faster than the front. The 3 stitches leading into the cross, 3 purl. 1, 2, 3, 2 knit, which is the back of the cross, 3 purl leading away from the cross, and that completes the cross column. And now we're going to do 3 more seed, purl, knit, purl. And then we have the 6 stitches behind the cable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 purls. And then we're purling the seed stitch, which is right here, and then we're slipping the loop with the yarn facing us. Okay, very good. Okay, we're about to start the 13th row of the pattern. I want these numbers to stick in my mind because we're going to be repeating this time and time again as we do color blocks of white, which are going to be interrupted by stripes of red and navy. So, this is the 13th row, and this is the row. See, we already have 8 rows of cross bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows of the bottom of the cross, and now we're going to do the cross beam on this row, while we're also doing part 2 of the braided cable. So here we go. We're on row 13. We're knitting the loop stitch. We're purling the seed. We're knitting the first 2 stitches of the braided cable. 1, 2. We're sliding the next 2 stitches of the braided cable to the cable needle, dropping it behind, knitting the last 2 stitches of the braided cable, and then bringing up carefully from behind the cable needle and knitting those 2 stitches, and that completes part 2 of the braided cable. We are doing 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl. Now we're going to start the cross beam, and the cross beam is still right smack in the middle of the 8 stitches, so we're going to knit 1 stitch and then purl 6 stitches to create the cross beam. We're knitting the first stitch, and then we're moving the yarn to the front so we can purl 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we have 1 stitch left in the cross column, and we're going to put our yarn back over and knit that 1 stitch. So let's take a look at it. We just purled 6 stitches across to create the cross beam, and stitches 3 and 4 of those 6 are directly in line with the rest of the bottom of the cross. It's really quite simple once you get going. Okay, we've knitted the last stitch of the cross column. Now we're going to purl, knit, purl these 3 seed stitches. Purl, knit, purl. And we're going to do part 2 of the second braided cable by knitting the first 2 stitches, slipping the next 2 stitches onto the cable needle and dropping it behind, knitting the last 2 stitches of the braided cable, and then bringing up our cable needle from behind carefully and knitting those 2 stitches off the cable needle. And then we're purling our seed stitch, our solo seed stitch, 29th stitch, and then slipping the loop. As you make more and more of it, you will see how beautiful it is. I'm especially excited because I am making my very first Christian neck scarf God and Country on Big Twist Value yarn from Joann. I love how this feels. It's very soft, it's very fluid. It won't be as heavy as the Loops and Threads Soft Classic that I made some of my other scarves on. They're going to be a little heavier, but this is fluid and lighter weight, and not a lot lighter. I mean, it's still going to be a wonderfully warm scarf, but I appreciate having more than one kind of yarn brand to make my God and Country scarves on. I'm super excited about this. Plus it feels wonderful. When you love the yarn you're using because it's soft and fluid and not tricky, it makes you want to just keep knitting even if you're tired because you're enjoying it. Okay, we are going to row 14, which is the back side of the crossbeam. So we're knitting our loop on the end, purling our single seed, purling the next 6 stitches behind the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Knit. We're making the next 3 seed stitches. Purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl. Now we're coming to the cross column. We're purling the first stitch because it's opposite the front, which was knit the first stitch. We purled the first stitch. Now we're moving the yarn to the knitting position. We're going to knit the next 6 stitches, which were purl 6 on the front. 2, 3 knit, 4 knit, 5 knit, and 6 knit. And then the 8th stitch we're going to purl again. And then we just completed the cross beam and we completed the cross column. Now we're going to purl, knit, purl the next 3 seed stitches. And then we're going to purl 6 across the back of the cable. 1, 2, purl 3, purl 4, purl 5, purl 6, and then we have the purl solitary seed, and then we slip the last loop. Now we have to finish the top of the cross, which is exactly the same way we made the bottom of the cross, where we're knitting 3, purling 2, and knitting 3, just like before we got to the cross beam. Okay, we're also going to do part 1 of the braided cable on the same row. So you're thinking about 2 different things every time you do an odd number row, the knit side, the front. Just trying to clarify this a little more for you. So we're going, this is row 15. No, that's not right. Can't be row 15. 4 and 12. 4 and 10 is 14. Yes, this is row 15. I'm sorry. So we're going to knit the loop, purl the single seed. This is part 1 of the braided cable. We're taking the first 2 stitches, putting it on the cabling needle, knit the next 2 stitches, bring up your cabling needle and knit those 2 stitches, knit the last 2 stitches of your braided cable, make your 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl, knit the next 3. This is the 3 before the cross. We're done with the cross beam. There were only 2 rows of cross beam. Now we're doing the top of the cross, which is 2 more rows of that. So we're purling 2 stitches in the middle, and then we're finishing the cross column with 3 knit again. Just like before, we got to the bottom. When we did the bottom part of the cross, we were knitting 3, purling 2, knitting 3, and we're finishing the cross the same way. After we get past the cross beam, we're just at 2 stitches of purl. 3 seed stitches: purl, knit, purl, and the second braided cable starts with the first 2 stitches going on the cable needle, dropping it in front, knit the next 2 stitches, knit the cable stitches, knit the last 2 stitches of the cable, purl the solitary seed, and slip the loop. And there you are. Once you figure out this pattern and see the rhythm in it, it will become faster and easier for you. Just remember where you're at all times with regard to your cables and with regard to your crosses. You don't have to think about seed stitches that are always done the same way. This purl, knit, purl on each side of the cable, on each side of the cross column is always the same front and back. Purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl. This single column of seeds along the edge before you get to the loop, that's always purl. You don't have to think about those. That just comes automatically. What you do have to think about is which part of your cable, part 1 or part 2 you're on, and where you are on the cross, and if you're not on the cross, where you are off the cross. So I'm going to finish this cross right now. We're on row 16. It's the back side, which the back side's always easier because there's a whole lot of purling going on. So we're knitting the loop, purling the seed, purling the 6 behind the cable. 1, 2, 3 purls, 4 purls, 5 purls, 6 purls. Then you have the seeds, purl, knit, purl. Then you have the back of the cross, which is 3 purls. This is the last row of the cross. 2 knits, which is the very top part of the cross. Back side. 3 purls, finishing up the cross column. And purl, knit, purl for the 3 seeds. And 6 purls for the back of the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 more purl for a solitary seed, and slip the loop with the yarn on your side. Now, the cross is finished. But we're not done with the white because we're going to do 4 more rows of this column of stockinettes so that the cross is pretty much in the center. It should be exact, but it doesn't work that way. One side's slightly longer than the other side. I forget which is which. But anyway, so we have to continue the cables, continue the seeds, no longer work on the cross because the cross is finished. Now we're just knitting 8 across on row 17 in the column of cross. So for the next 4 rows, this will all be the same stitch. On the odd number side, it'll be knits, knit 8, and on the even number side, the back, it'll be purl 8s, and then you do that again 1 more cycle while you're remembering how to make your cables. So we're about to do part 2 of the braided cable while we go back to knitting 8 across here. So let's do this, and this is row 17. Knit your loop, purl your seed, knit the first 2 stitches. This is part 2 of the braided cable. Slip the next 2 stitches onto the cable needle, drop it down behind, knit the next 2 stitches, bring your needle up from behind carefully, knit those 2 stitches off the cable needle, purl, knit, purl, knit 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, purl, knit, purl for the 3 seed, and then the second braided cable is part 2. Knit the first 2 stitches, slip the next 2 stitches onto the cable needle and drop behind. It's a little tricky. I haven't figured it out how to be efficient with that. Knit the next 2 stitches and then bring your cable needle up carefully so that you're not catching it on anything, and knit the 2 stitches off the cable needle, and you have just completed another braided cable. And purl your seed and slip your loop. I wish I could. You have to touch it to feel how soft it is. It's wonderful. Okay. That was the, I think, 17th row. Yes. Now we're going to the 18th row, the back, mostly purl stitches, but you have to count. Knit your loop, purl your seed, purl 6 behind the cable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl, knit, purl for the seeds, purl 8, it's the back of the cross column, and we're done with the cross, so now it's just purl 8 across, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, purl, knit, purl, and then purl 6 for the back of the cable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl your seed and slip your loop. Now you can see the entire cross framed by stockinette stitches on the left and right and on the top and bottom. And we have 2 more rows of this before we change color. So we're going to do it, and then we're going to pause. Knit the loop, purl the seed. We're back at part 1 of the next braided cable. So braided cable, one set of braided cable is 4 rows. Part 1 and part 2. You drop your 2 stitches in front, you knit the next 2, we're on part 1. Bring up your cable stitches and knit them. Knit the last 2 stitches of your braided cable. Do your 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl. We're knitting 8 above the cross. 6, 7, 8. Another 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, part 1 of your braided cable, 2 stitches to the cable needle, drop in front. Knit the 2 from the cable needle, knit your last 2 of the braided cable, then you purl your seed and slip your loop. Now why do I knit so fast? Because I've made hundreds of these. I've literally made hundreds of Christian neck scarves. I have hit the 800 mark in recent months. This is the pattern I want to stay with. When I want to make a wider scarf, I increase the number of seed stitches by 2 per column, so I'm adding 4 stitches to the total number of stitches on the needle. I always go with the odd number because when I have an odd number of seed stitches, I get to do front and back exactly the same way. That's the only change I make to the pattern. It gives me the flexibility to make children's scarves with only 1 seed stitch and a smaller needle to make it a little tighter, so that it's narrower for little necks. If I want a wider scarf, I just add seed stitches, 4 stitches. I can even add 8 stitches and make it even wider. If I really want a wide scarf, I can make that happen by adding seed stitches. I can add seed stitches along the edges. If I wanted a super wide scarf, I could make big wide columns of seeds on both sides of the cables if I wanted to do that. But for our purposes here, we have an easy 30 stitch pattern, which looks complicated and confusing, but I hope once you get rolling on it, you'll have as easy a time at making this as I do now. And I hope you love it. If you're having trouble figuring out what rows you're on, like if I wanted to know how many rows of the cross I can count back here, you count your purl stitches, you count the loop in the middle, and that tells you how many rows you have. So back here, you count purl stitches to make it easier. The middle purl stitch has a loop in the middle. This tells me I've already done 3 rows of purl on the back. I only need to do 1 more row of purl on the back to achieve my white color block. So we're going to finish that right now. Knit the loop, purl the seed, purl the 6 stitches across the back of the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we have seed, purl knit purl, eight stitches of purl across the back of the cross column. 1, 2, 3 purl, 4 purl, 5 purl, 6 purl, 7 purl, 8 purl, 3 seed purl knit purl, and then 6 more purl across the back of the cable. 2, 3 purl, 4 purl, 5 purl, 6 purl, purl the seed, and slip the loop. Yarn over here. Now I'm going to pause the video because I want to bring up the red yarn. And then I'm going to show you a trick on how to add a stripe without having transition marks in our work. It's a little bit tricky, but once I figured it out and made it a habit, it wasn't tricky anymore. Okay, I'm back. I have attached the red yarn. The yarn was on the back because that's how we're doing things when we're making that loop. I snipped off the white yarn and tied on the red. And I'm about to start knitting in red. There's only 2 rows of red, and then we're going to go to navy for 4 rows, and then to 2 more rows of red, and that will complete my set of stripes. So as I said before, we're not going to knit in pattern. Well, we're knitting in the cable pattern, but we're not purling any stitches on this row. So we're knitting the loop stitch, and instead of bringing the yarn forward, which out of habit I did, we're going to knit the next stitch instead of purl it. Only on the first row of a new color do we do this. Okay. To keep the pattern flat, smooth, and uniform. The stripes are more important than the pattern right now. So we're beginning part 2 of the cable, so we're going to cable as usual. We're knitting the first 2, we're slipping the next 2, onto the cable needle and dropping behind. We're knitting the next 2, and then we're knitting the 2 stitches from the cable needle. And again, we are not doing any purling this row. We're only knitting. So the next 3 seed stitches are really 3 knit stitches. The next 8 knit stitches are still 8 knit stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the next 3 seed stitches are going to be 3 knit stitches. 1, 2, 3, and then the cable. Knit the first 2. This is part 2 of the braided cable. We're picking up the next 2 stitches on the cable needle, dropping them behind, knitting the last 2 stitches of the braided cable, and then bringing up the cable stitches and knitting those. And that last seed, we are knitting, not purling. Only on the first row of a new color do we do this. And then we are slipping the same way for that loop on the end, where you're bringing the yarn forward before you transfer the loop to the other needle. Now, if I were to have purled where I was supposed to purl on this row, there would be interruptions of color between red and white. You would see white and then red and then white again, because the purl stitch reveals things. Look at the back. That's what would have happened on the front. I don't like that on the front. I like my smooth transition of color. So I'm willing to sacrifice a row of pattern to accomplish smooth transfer of color. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I learned this trick from another tutorial, and I thought, well, it's tricky because you have to really pay attention to what you're doing, but it's worth it to me because I like the smooth transition of color. You only do it on the first row of a new color. So this is where you pay a lot of attention to what you're doing, because you're trying to interrupt your pattern for the sake of continuity of smoothness in the color exchange. It's worth it. So I'm going to flip this over and do the second row of red. I'm back in pattern. I'm knitting my loop. I'm purling my second stitch, which is a knit on the front. It's not going to look any different on the front, because anywhere I purl, I'm going to have a knit on the front. So you do have to count, because there is a 3-seed stitch coming up right now. So I have a purl, which is a knit on the front, but then I'm knitting the next stitch like I always supposed to be doing. That's going to show up as a purl on the other side. So there will be a bump there like there's supposed to be. And then purl again. Now I'm purling 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm going to do purl, knit, purl again. Purl, knit, purl, and I'm going to purl 6 across the back of the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm purling the seed in pattern, and I'm slipping the loop with the yarn towards me. But we're going to change color again. We're going to navy from here. It's really quite striking. Okay, I've attached my navy blue yarn, tying it to the red yarn on the back. Just a simple double knot. When I weave these ends in later, I will show you how I do that. So, we are starting another new color. Therefore, this will be like the first row of red, where I'm only knitting the row. I'm knitting my loop on the end, and I'm knitting across as I'm making new cables. So this is part 1 of the braided cable. We're grabbing the first 2 stitches, dropping it in the front with the cable needle, knit the next two, knit the needles, knit the cable needle stitches, knit the last two, now normally I would do purl knit purl here, but because it's navy blue first row, I am knitting 3 stitches, I'm knitting the next 8, four, 5, 6, 7, 8, and here I am at 3 seed stitches again. Instead of seed, I'm going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3, because it's the first row of a new color. And now I'm doing part 1 of the braided cable again, so I'm picking up the next 2 stitches with the cabling needle, dropping it in front, knit the next 2, 1, 2, knit the cable stitches, 1, 2, knit the last 2 stitches, knit what would have been a seed stitch instead of purl it, and then slip the loop with the yarn towards me. You have to pay attention when you're doing stripes, more attention than before, because you don't want to mess up the front of this scarf. See how pretty this is when it's just knitted across? I want the stripes to pop, not the weird bumpy stuff that happens on the back. Okay, now I can knit in pattern. For the next 3 rows of navy, I'm knitting in pattern. Therefore, there will be a lot of purling going on and knitting. I knit my loop stitch, I'm purling the next stitch, I'm purling the next 6 behind the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm purling the seeds. 1, 2, 3. I'm purling 8 across behind the cross panel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Another purl knit purl for the seed. Purl, knit, purl, and then I purl 6 across behind the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I purl my seed and then I slip my loop with the yarn towards me. Now we're going to the front again. See, I think this looks wonderful. We keep the cables going so you can see that, but you can't see the weird bumpy stuff that happens on the back when you change color. This is really wonderful. Okay, 2 more rows of navy in pattern. We're knitting the loop, we're purling the seed, we're doing part 2 of the braided cable. 1, 2 stitches knitted, then we're slipping the next 2 stitches to the cable needle, dropping it behind, knitting the last 2 stitches of the cable, knitting the 2 stitches that are on the cable needle. Now we're moving into the 3 seeds. It's harder to see on dark yarn, so you have to count. Purl, knit, purl. Thank God it's only 3, huh? Then you're knitting 8 stitches across for the cross column. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 3 seed, purl, knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, then knit the first 2 stitches of the next cable, take the next 2 stitches and slip them onto the cabling needle and drop behind, knit the last 2 stitches of the cable, bring up the cabling needle and knit those 2 stitches, 2, and then you purl your seed, which will produce a bump, but it'll be hard to see in navy blue. And then slip your loop with the yarn towards you. And we're about to do the 4th and last navy. So we're knitting the first loop, we're purling the seed, we're purling the next 6 stitches behind the cable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're purl, knit, purl, for the seeds, and then we're purling 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 3 seed again, purl, knit, purl, which again is hard to see in navy, but we want to resume pattern. And then purl 6 behind the cable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're purling on the seed, 1, and slipping on the loop with the yarn towards us. And now we've completed the navy blue stripe, and now we're going to snip this off and attach the red. I love this pattern. Okay, I've attached the red yarn, and here again we're starting a new color, so the first row of red again will be knitting across. I do have to make my cables, but there won't be any purl stitches. I'm such a creature of habit, and I keep trying to move the yarn so I can purl, but we're not purling this row. Okay, this is part 1 of the braided cable. So I brought the cable needle forward on the first 2 stitches. I just knitted the second 2 stitches. I am now knitting the cable stitches, and then I'll be knitting the last 2 of the braided cable and continuing to knit across. So instead of seed stitch again, we're just knitting 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we're knitting 8 where the cross panel is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're going to knit 3 instead of seed. Purl knit purl is not happening this row. It's just 3 knits. 2, 3, and then the last braided cable, part 1. Slip the first 2 stitches onto the cable needle, drop it in front, knit the next 2 stitches in red. This is all in red, but there are no purl stitches on this row. Knit the cable stitches, then knit the last 2 stitches of the braided cable. Knit what would have been the seed stitch, and then slip the loop onto the needle. One more row of red in pattern. In pattern. We're knitting the loop stitch. We're purling the seed stitch. We're purling the 6 stitches behind the braided cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the seed stitches, purl knit purl. Then the 8 stitches behind the cross column. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, purl knit purl, seed stitch, then the 6 purls behind the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then we purl the seed and we slip the loop. Now we have completed the stripe. Isn't this pretty? We have completed the stripe. So I'm running out of video. Beginning here above the ribbing is where we start this. It's 20 rows of cross color block in white, 2 rows of red, 4 rows of navy, 2 more rows of red. Just remember to knit across on the first row of a new color. So when I start the white again, I'll be knitting across that row too. There won't be any pattern there except for where we're doing the actual cabling on the braided cable. There won't be any purl stitches. That's what I need to be saying. No purl stitches on the first row of a new color. I'm going to end this video here for now and pick it up after I've made a few of these. But what you're going to be doing is repeating this much, which is 28 rows, all the white above the ribbing, 28 rows, 20 rows of white, 2 rows of red, 4 rows of navy, 2 more rows of red, and then do it all over again. I'm returning to this tutorial on Saturday, August 10th, 2024. I wanted to update you on the progress I've made. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 crosses. And I have morning voice, sorry. So now we're at the point where we're starting the 7th cross, which is going to begin the next 6 crosses going in the other direction, where we're going to start knitting the top of the cross, not the bottom of the cross. But before we do that, before I show you how to do that, 1 cross, 7th cross, I'm going to take you to the back of the work because I wanted to show you that for me it's easier to tie in my yarn ends when I'm changing colors. I have lots of yarn ends because my stripes are multiple. It's not just a few yarn ends, it's a lot. And for me, it's just a lot easier to weave them in as I go along. Excuse me. So I've already tied in the ends for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and I'm about to show you how I do the 6th. I don't just weave in the yarns. I don't want these to come out. I don't want anything to untie itself, so I go to a lot of trouble to make sure it's secure. I don't want people having unraveling scarves, and I don't know that that would happen, but I don't want to take any chances. I'm just really picky like that. So here's the yarn ends on the back. I'm going to get my work yarn out of the way. I have a crochet hook. This is kind of thin yarn, so I've gone with kind of a small crochet hook. And what you're doing, and I'm sure most of the people watching this video are already well versed in how to weave in ends, but I'm going to assume there's people who are new at knitting and don't know how to do this. I'm not even sure this is the correct way to do stuff. This is the way I do stuff. So on my first, I'm working left to right. There's 4 sets of yarn ends because I've changed color 4 times at the stripes. So I'm taking my 2 yarn ends, and on the left is where the white is. So I'm taking the white yarn end, and I'm left-handed. Right-handed people might have trouble with this, but I'm left-handed, so I'm coming in under a white loop next to the red loops. This is on the back, of course. Going into the loop, just grabbing the loop, not being haphazard about it. And I'm going in 1 time and then going to the next white loop, whichever one I grab, which is this one. And I'm weaving it in. I'm just weaving it in very simply. And then when I do 3 of those, I'm in about more than a 1/2 inch from the edge. And then I grab my red one and I'm weaving that into a red loop on the back. And then, see, it does split very easily. This yarn is cheap yarn. I do like it because it's soft. I'm going to keep using this yarn. So, 2nd loop, 3rd loop. Now I've gone in 3 loops on each of the 2 colors, and then I don't just weave them in, I tie another knot. I have a knot tied at the end, which is underneath. It's not showing on the front. But I'm tying this again in another double knot, tying it super tight, and then with my scissors I'm snipping this off about just a little more than a 1/4 inch beyond where I tied the knot. Now, by doing it this way, I have enough left over so that it shouldn't, I didn't snip it off too close to the knot. And by snipping it off here, far enough away from the edge, it won't show on the front. Okay? So now I'm going to my next yarn ends, which will be navy and red. Tighten that knot on the end. Again, it's underneath the scarf, it's on the back side, not going to show on the front. Weaving in the navy, 1 loop, 2 loops, through a navy loop. so it doesn't show on the front. You don't want your backside work showing on the front. That would mess up all the plans you made to have a very neat stripe transition. It's a little harder when you're working with a dark yarn to see what you're doing, but okay, that was my third. And now I'm going to take the red strand, do the same thing in the red loops. 1, 2, just grabbing a red loop. I don't want to grab a red and a navy. This is where it's tricky because they're up against the navies, and the navies are dark, and they're trying to sneak into my crochet hook right now, and I have to be careful how I grab. I'm going to skip that next red and go to the following red. Okay, it's a little looser than the last one. On the front of this is the cables, and some of the stitches are a little tighter. So here I am. I've gone in 3. I'm even further away from the edge of the scarf than I was before. So I'm going to tie these two ends together in a double knot. And snip that off about a 1/4 inch from the knot. These aren't particularly good scissors. I should have cleared my throat better before I started, sorry. Okay, now we're going to the third set of tie-in yarn. 1, 2, 3, and the red. 1, 2, and 3. Some of these stitches are really tight. I apologize this is taking so long. Just the red. Having a little trouble here. Okay. And we'll tie that off. Just a simple double knot. Tie it tight. Snip it off. I used to wait until I was all done with the scarf and then tie in all these ends at the same time. Boy, was that tedious. Took forever. I'd rather do it as I go. So as I go, I'm starting the white, the main color, doing 3 or 4 rows before I start weaving in the ends. So just remember, you're putting your reds inside the red loops and your navies inside the navy loops and your whites inside the white loops, and you won't go wrong. Make sure you're only grabbing one strand, one color, before you tie it off, because you don't want the opposite color, the contrasting color, showing on the front because you wove it into the wrong color. You want to make sure that your weaving in is hidden by the color it's weaving into. So I'm on my last of 4 tie-ins. We're weaving in and then snipping, tying it off and then snipping it off. And now we're done. We are done with this series of stripes. Now, those are pretty well hidden on the back. They're going to show if people are looking for them, but I just like to do things this way, and there may be a million other knitters out there that don't like that I tie knots on the back, but I want it secure. Now, let's take a look at the front. Because I was trying to be careful, not grabbing the wrong color when I wove in my ends, my stripes are still nice and flat, nice and even, a nice smooth transition from color to color on the stripes on the front. I'm super happy with this pattern because, as I said before, I am not knitting in pattern on the very first row of the next color. I'm knitting across so that the front is smooth. And then I pick up the pattern again on row 2, 3, and 4. If I'm on the navy, there's 4 rows. But definitely on the even number rows, I'm knitting in pattern. Now, excuse me, I'm going to begin showing you how to reverse the cross. As I showed you before, we have 6 crosses going in the upright direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because we're going to have 12 crosses, which is going to take us to 5.5 feet long on this scarf. Makes me super happy. That's my most desired length for a scarf. I just like 5.5 feet. We're going to begin knitting the reverse cross. And all that means is you're changing the order of how you purl in the middle. For experienced knitters, this is going to be a no-brainer. For some of you who may not understand this, I'm going to walk you through it. So, we're going to knit the first row of the cross. I've already done my 4 rows of stockinette in the cross column. Excuse me. So we're going to start the cross, and what that means is on row 5 of this white, which is the first row of the cross, we're going to start knitting the top of the cross, not the bottom of the cross. So it still starts the same way. You've got knit your loop on the end, purl your seed, make your cable, which is knit 2. This is a part 2 of the cable. Cable back, drop the needle, knit the last 2 stitches, bring up the 2 stitches from the cable needle from the back, knit those, purl, knit, purl the next 3 seed stitches, purl, knit, purl. Now we're going to do the cross column. We're knitting 3, we're purling 2. This is the top of the 7th cross. 1, 2. We're knitting 3. Purl, knit, purl for the next 3 seed stitches. Purl, knit, purl. Second cable, part 2. 1, 2. Cable back. Knit 2. Bring up the back cable stitches, knit those, 1, 2, purl the seed, slip the loop with the yarn in the front, flip it over. Now we're doing row 2 of the back of the top. This is the back of the top of the cross. So instead of purling, when we get to that, we're going to be knitting. So all these other stitches are mostly purls. 1, 2, okay. Purl 6 for the back of the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Purl, knit, purl for the seeds. Purl, knit, purl. Now we're starting the cross column. Purl 3, 1, 2, 3, knit 2 for the cross, purl 3 again, and now we're finishing the cross column and moving on to the 3 seed stitches. Purl, knit, purl, and we're purling the back of the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Purl the seed stitch, which is just 1, and then slide the loop on. Slip the loop with the yarn in the front towards you. Okay. Now we flip it over and look at what we've done. We have just completed the top of the 7th cross. I hope I haven't thrown you off too much. This was supposed to be a 10 cross pattern, and now it is a 12 cross pattern. So the 7th cross is the one where we're flipping the direction of the cross. Now this next row, because we're going in the opposite direction, this next row, row 3 of the cross, will actually be the beginning of the cross beam. This part right here is going the other direction now. So row 3 will be the beginning of the cross beam. 3 and 4 will make the cross beam. So we're going to start that right now. We're knitting the loop on the end. We're purling our seed. We're making our cable, which is part 1. Cable front, knit 2, complete cable front, knit stitches 5 and 6, purl, knit, purl for the seeds, now we're only knitting 1 stitch for the cross column, and then we're purling 6 for the cross beam. 1 purl, 2 purl, 3 purl, 4 purl, 5 purl, 6 purl, and then the 8th stitch of the crosses column is a knit stitch. Then purl, knit, purl for the seeds. Purl, knit, purl, and then the second braided cable. Cable front, this is part 1, cable front, knit 2, complete cable front, knit stitches 5 and 6 to complete the cable, purl the seed, and slip the loop with the yarn in front. Now we're going to the back of the cross beam and completing the cross beam. Knit the loop, purl the seed, purl the next 6 stitches behind the cable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl, knit, purl for the seed, 1, 2, 3, purl 1. Now on the back of the crossbeam, these are knit stitches, so you're knitting 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl 1, purl, knit, purl for the seeds, 1, knit, purl 1. Purl 6 for behind the cable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl 1, and slip the loop with the yarn in front. Now we've finished the crossbeam. What that means now, as you're looking at the front of your work, the next 8 rows will be the bottom of the cross, which will all show purl on the front. So those 2 stitches in the middle from the next row on for the next 8 rows will be purl stitches, and then you'll have your cross going the other direction. And again, the reason we're doing this is if we were to drape this scarf in the middle at the back of the neck, these stripes meeting the back of the neck, all the crosses would be hanging in the correct direction from the neck down, so that we wouldn't have any upside down crosses showing up to someone who's looking at it from in front of you. We think this is important, not to have upside down crosses as it's being worn. So I'm going to stop the camera for a moment and make sure this is showing up, and then I'll resume knitting this 7th cross and this 7th white panel color block.